Now I'm on mute. So, okay. We are live and on Facebook, and we've started our webinar officially. Hi, welcome everyone who's tuning in from different parts of the world. Also people who are joining us on Facebook, and people who've taken out time to join us directly on Zoom here. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Anusha Sumani, and I am the program associate for Africa programs at MCW Global, and I will be your moderator, your host for today, as we delve into this discussion. Just to talk more about insights before welcoming our today's guest. MCW Insights is basically an initiative where we are bringing in global thought leaders from around to engage in some thoughtful conversations, to steer some discussions and insights into what's happening around the globe, and also particularly on thematic areas that MCW particularly focuses on. That's economic security, health, and education. And today we're bringing in an interesting topic which is a bit close to my heart, and it's on community development. So it's basically engaging communities, and we really believe that engaging community development and engaging communities is the crux of community development work, and we really believe in the bottom up participatory approach. But what is this approach? It's basically like when you bring in the crucial stakeholders and bring them to the table and make them a crucial part of the discussion where they have a say in the solution making process. But of course, this entire thing comes with its own set of challenges. So we're going to dive deeper into understanding what are those challenges in when it comes to community development work, from the interventionists, from community practitioners, and people who have closely worked with communities before. And to further this conversation, today we have two amazing people here with us. First, we have Kabinga, who is joining us from New York, and he is actually a founder of one of the affiliates of MCW Global. So that's MC-Zambia. He started the Community Center in Zambia, and he is also currently the MCW Global's board member. Hi, Kabinga. It's so great to have you on board today.
Thank you, Anusha, and thank you, everybody, and good afternoon, Dr. Kengia.
Yeah, so Dr. Kengia, hi, Dr. Kengia. Dr. Kengia is actually joining us from Tanzania, and he works with the president office, and his designation, I feel like he's somebody who works with the communities, and he serves as the gap between the national and the communities locally. So he's the coordinator for regional health management teams, Dreams Project and research at President Office, regional administration, and local government. So he really knows the crux behind, what happens really behind the scenes when it comes to community development work. So thank you, Dr. Kengia, for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you both here.
Thanks, Anusha, and thanks all for inviting me to be a speaker for this important event.
Great, thank you. And as we get started, before we get started, I just want to give a heads up to everybody who's watching us, joining us on Facebook, who are joining us on Zoom directly. Make sure to grab paper and pen and take notes during this conversation. Make sure you have some snacks around you to keep you energized during this part. But also, make sure to jot down your questions because towards the end, we'll be taking in some questions from the speakers. And if you're joining us on Zoom directly, you'll get a chance to unmute yourself and speak to the speaker yourself and engage in that conversation. But if you're joining us from anywhere else, make sure to pour in your question in the chat, and our team will be happy to take that up. So yeah, that's an insight that I wanted to, or heads up I wanted to give. So as we get started with this conversation, and I think this is something that we feel that it's too general, too broad of a topic, so it might take a while to unpack all of these this topic. But I really want to get started with asking Dr. Kengia and Kabinga that when we talk about development itself, there are various types of development that's present. We talk about international development, we hear people talking about regional, national development, but we also talk about community development, right? With all of these different styles and with different types of development that are present, can you help the audience understand that what is really the key difference between these three? Like, is there really a difference to begin with? And if so, what would that be? I'll start with Dr. It seems, Kabinga, you are actually on mute, so I'll start with you.
All right. Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the introductions. One part, even before I begin, I think it's a pleasure and honor actually to share the stage with somebody as accomplished as Dr. Kengia, and I look forward to learning as well. But so coming to your question, I think development, right? It's a very broad spectrum. So it depends on where you're sitting. So international development will be between borders, of course, and local development. Then there is even individual development within those communities. And from my perspective, I'll be more centered towards the community aspect of the development and how that translates into the global village, per se. So development, in terms of what you've characterized, the different developments, I think when it comes down to it, it's the same thing. We are trying to empower each other so that we can live in this global village in a meaningful way together.
So empowering individuals so that we can live in this global village. And when you say global village, the word diversity came in my mind, because like we all from different ethnicities, from different cultures, from different race, and we all joining in, and it's like a part of a global village. But it's really, at the end of the day, it's really about empowering, making lives a bit better. Thanks, Kabinga, for sharing with us that part of that perspective with us. Dr. Kengia, over to you. What do you have to say about this?
Yeah, thank you very much. Like what Kabinga said, to me, it really matters who derive the development now. So talking about the community development, we have now the community members who are on top of the agenda, but sometimes you can have the national development where now you have the nation itself. So it's more of a top-down approach, and then from the community development, like a bottom-up approach. I just wanted to add those few remarks. Thank you.
Got it. So it's basically, you define it as a model, like, where there are from the national side, it goes to a bottom-up, top-down approach, and then from the community, it's a bottom-up approach, right? So, and out of curiosity, and I feel that this is something that I would want to know, and also I feel like our audience would want to really understand as we get deeper, as we dive deeper into this conversation, is how did you both come into, like, how did you guys get involved in community development per se? And when we talk about community development, it's really like being involved with local communities. What was, if I have to ask in layman language, that would really be, how did you guys get involved? What was your why behind it? So Dr. Kengia, if you want to talk a bit more about that.
Thank you very much. So for me, my involvement is more related to my job. So I've worked with the community while working at the region level, and the capacity up to the level of the regional medical officer in Mwanza, in Tanzania. So one of the biggest agenda as a regional medical officer is to ensure that the communities, they have what is required in terms of health services. So there's a very strong engagement at that point in time. But also nowadays at Po-RALG, President Office, Regional Administration, Local Government. So a major role is to coordinate the implementations of the policies and guidelines derived by the Ministry of Health. Of course, we have to reflect it now and ensure that it is being realized in the community. Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Go ahead.
go ahead. Yeah. So I think so for me, in terms of first off, I think everybody is engaged in community development. And for me, what really drove me into in terms of getting more involved and being more active into a certain kind of community development was just understanding the different disparities around the world. You know, I grew up, I was a tennis player, so I traveled different countries, so different dynamics, and that just the different economic stratas as we went along. And as a child, that really bothered me, asking myself, why should it be like this, right? And got me more involved and got me more interested in ensuring that I did just, even just a little bit to help push the next person to where they want to be. And I'll take this in terms of, and I mean, it's numerous. We see a lot of young people in terms of making that change. I mean, we have even just our on MCW, the way it was started, right? It was this young man in New York who was, went on a school trip and got energized, realized that he's like, oh, you know what? I can actually make change. You start becoming passionate about ensuring that your neighbor, the person who's next to you, is able to achieve in terms of just their basic needs. And then secondly, what do they want to achieve in life? What can you do to help get them to the next level? And I think all of us in terms of, so you don't have to wear any hat to say, community engagement. Even I believe, even just sometimes, even just encouraging somebody to pursue their dream is because you're giving them hope. So meaning, for me, from a definition of community engagement, you've already started that community and you've started engaging.
Wow, that was quite profound because it made me also realize at what like the young leaders who join us at our fellowship program and our conferences and people who are passionate about their projects and something to do in their communities. They may not be somebody who are already doing at an international or national level. They are probably they've just started out. They have an insight into the work that they're doing, but not someone who's already established as an international or national leader, and they're getting started and they get a platform to do so. And what I think we mostly hear is like, being just if they can inspire one person, if they can engage a community in a local setting and steer that towards that change, that's a ripple effect that they aspire to create. Like it doesn't matter what the number is. It's always like the quality over quantity.
Exactly.
So that's something that reminded me of that. Thank you, Kabinga, for sharing that. I also, since you mentioned that you've been traveling around the world, you've been engaging with different communities. I also wanted to touch base that in what ways is community development the same and unique in different communities around the globe? And that's a question for you both, Kabinga and Dr. Kengia. That how do you envision the communities to be the same and unique at the same time?
So I think I'll start and then probably Doctor can add something as well. I think the fundamental in terms of the start of any engagement, I think is the same, right? Regardless of where you are, I think one of the things is you have to ask what is the question? And what I mean by this is, what are we trying to solve? Why are we even engaging? Once you have that established, doesn't matter in what setting, if you're engaging a community, then at least you've got a purpose, you've got something you're going after, right? As opposed to just saying, oh, let's solve world hunger. That will take you a very long time because you're not focused. Where do you want to solve world hunger? So there has to be that question, what is the fundamental reason we're even engaging in the first place? because then using that, you start, you understand who the real stakeholders are. You understand how each of your decisions will impact the different stakeholders. And then you have to also understand your setting. Where are we? What kind of environment is it? So when you say the differences, you see in certain communities, you have to be very culturally aware and culturally sensitive. There are certain things you might mean well, but you go in a certain place and your approach, just your approach, because of the culture there, it'll be, then, you don't make the impact that you had actually wanted. Or maybe even the community you say you're trying to engage actually starts fighting. Then you start wondering, why are they fighting? So you have to take away the know-it-all kind of mentality to saying, what is the question? How can we collaborate? How would you want us to engage?
Well, you had me at like when you said like gotta remove that know-it-all kind of a mentality, like coming in from the outside, and that's one of the next questions that I have for you both is like coming in from the removing that know-it-all hat and really asking these fundamental questions that you told us. Dr. Kengia.
Thank you very much. Yeah, just to add it, echo from Kabinga, I think it's important also to understand the community itself. Maybe the difference could be from one area to another in terms of the cultural aspect, as you said, but also the people's knowledge and understanding about different matters. So from one community to another, the engagement might be a bit different. Customization might be necessary from one area to another in terms of the engagement. So just to echo the issue of understand the cultural issues is key also when it comes into community development.
Absolutely. I think you both hit the nail when you said like being culturally sensitive when it comes to working with different communities, because a certain topic might be, let's say, mental health, right? It can be a taboo in many societies more than others. Like I think there are some societies that it might be a stigma. There's a lot of stigma that's attached, and even though you might want to create a project or just work improve people's mental health, you might have to be a bit more sensitive, might have to do much more research and be a bit more empathetic towards what the communities might be facing and going through. So I think that is a crucial part when it comes to engagement with the communities. Thank you for mentioning that. And also, as Kabinga mentioned, that start with the question of why am I doing what am I doing? What am I set to do? What am I set out to do? Right? And that's how you list down your stakeholders. Who are you engaging? And that's the process you start with. So I think one of the questions that come to me, and I think that's something that I want to ask as a follow up from the know it all had, is also the role that power or authority plays when it comes to community engagement, right? So I think I'm gonna reflect back on one of the experiences that I had a couple of years back. So I was in my undergraduate, like doing the thesis and all of it, but I had to do field work and all of those interesting stuff. And I wanted to do research on the labeling that's done on juvenile delinquents and their rehabilitation, their social reintegration. So of course, as part of it, I had to go into that premises where they were incarcerated. And although I was very excited at the start, I had everything that I thought, like I read, I researched everything. But as soon as I entered the premises, a clear power dynamic was it was very evident, because I was somebody who was coming in from the outside, interviewing those who were inside, and there was somebody that's an extraction of information that was being carried. And there was a clear dynamic that I will be free versus them not being able to be free in the same place. Like they and that's when I realized that it's more than this thing is more than just labeling or this issue. It's a lot about the power dynamics that's present in the community when you are engaging with communities. And we might have the right intention, but you also have to be considerate towards what power do you hold, what authority you're bringing in with yourself. So I want to ask you guys, like, how in your experience of working with or engaging with communities, um, what role do you feel that the power plays or authority plays here? Are there any instances, any stories that you guys have faced in your work and you want to share it with the audience? Dr. Kengia.
Thank you very much. I think what is important here is, first of all, need to have a very clear stakeholders mapping, understanding the area that you want to implement such particular projects, for the particular community development projects, so to speak. So those peoples, you need not to underestimate them. So sometimes they have already some of the solutions. So if you are coming also with your different solution, it might have some resistance, so to speak. So you need to understand those peoples, and of course, while doing the stakeholders mapping, you need to understand the entry point. So in some areas, there are some of the influential peoples whom you can start speaking with them. And then from that angle, then you can be able now to diversify your thinking. So I think stakeholders mapping is key, and having a point of entry and not underestimating the community. Yeah.
I'm gonna hold that thought there, and I'm gonna add in after Kabinga adds to this.
So I think very well summarized by Doctor, but I'll add as well, it's you have to understand where the power lies in a community when you're going in, right? So depending on the setting, if you're engaging the government, I'll give an example of, say, the way the setup in most African governments is you have the minister, who's like the secretary of, say, transportation, here equivalent in the US. Then you have the deputy, then you have the PS, who's the permanent secretary. And usually the permanent secretary is the administrative head of the ministry. So when you're bringing something like that, you want to make sure that you understand, one, you understand the entry point. Who holds the power in that ministry? Is it the minister or it's the PS? Sometimes the minister might be at the top, but doesn't hold the power because the PS has been in his position for the last 20 years and he knows everybody. And if he's not on board, nothing will work. So what are you trying to do? You try to find out to make sure that you understand the entry point of what's the best. So you go and say, okay, what's the community we're trying to engage? How's the power distributed? And then when you take it to, but then don't lose sight, right? Don't lose sight of why you're engaging. If you're going into a community, let's say you're going into a community, sometimes we've engaged, say, the headman or the chief. That, I would say, for me, is more administrative, but you need to understand that the real power, especially nowadays, lies with the masses. In terms of the larger community, that's where the real power lies. So you have to see how do we bring them in so that they understand that this is their project. That's number one, ownership. You have to make sure that you're bringing in, because you start taking away those power dynamics. Even you coming in, they might be feeling like, oh, we can't really engage, we can't really tell them what we think because they came with a PowerPoint. And so when you tell them, even your opening, say, you know what, so far this is what I know, but I'm here so that we can talk about it. Because you don't know who has the solution sometimes. You might even have the wrong question going in, sitting in an office somewhere, going into a community saying, yeah, they really need water. It's like, no, we have water, but the problem is the quality of the water is bad. So you go there, you find that there's abundance of water, but it's just the quality. It's like the water is dirty. So all you needed was helping them, making sure that they're drinking clean water. So, you have to be able to understand the power dynamics within the community. And then, as Doctor said, know your entry point, and then don't lose sight of why you're there so that you can galvanize the masses so that they're behind the idea to feel ownership, because that way your project has much better success.
Well, very well put, but both of you. Think so. As you just summarized, knowing the entry point, knowing who your stakeholder is, who stakeholders are, not losing sight, and knowing where the power lies, really. So Kabinga, you mentioned something on like, you might come in with a solution in mind, and the communities also might feel that they cannot engage in the solution making process. And you gave us like a quick example of how you can engage in the conversations, but how do you really like um, dismantle the power thing there, and start talking, like start having that conversation? How do you make the other person feel comfortable that you're not an outsider and you're not a threat, so to speak, in the community? And that's a question for both of you. Like, how do you start the process?
I'll give you an example,
Mhm.
right? Let's say you're building a youth center, as we have in Zambia, right?
Yeah.
You go there, don't go and ask for a chair and sit by the sidelines while everybody is drawing water, while everybody is working. Get your hands dirty, right? Sometimes even choose the job that nobody wants to do in terms of going to serve everybody. So show that you're there to serve, right? Be of service, because usually when you're serving, then people start opening up. And that's what you really want in a community engagement. You want people to actually open up, people to realize that it's not that you feel like you know everything. It's because you feel like maybe if you work together, you can help each other. And underline that you can help each other, because there's this misconception that people enjoy saving like charity, right? But what we found out, even like when you go to different places, is that people don't really want handouts. People want to be given, empowered to be able to find their own solutions. So when you go there with the mindset of, I'm here to serve, I know you've got this issue, and I think I might help you get to your resolution, then that power dynamic starts getting cut. And then what you do, and sometimes you have to understand the local politics as well, that you do this with the community where you think that, where you actually know the power really lies. Then at the end of the day, because you know the headman will feel bad that I was not the one who came up with the idea, you take it to the headman and say, the community said A, B, C, D. We're so thankful to you for opening it up. He's also being empowered to feel like I'm in charge, right? So in terms of you hold deep dialogue basically to understand, to create solutions that are long lasting, because then they have, the community has resilience, and there's hope, and then just self-determination, because I think that's what determines how far off, in terms of even just from a success perspective, in terms of how invested was the community where you actually are.
Yes, investment and ownership by the
Yeah.
community itself. Dr. Kengia, where are your thoughts on this?
Thank you very much. Just to add, something that is important also is to be careful when it comes into talking with the big guys, the level of the community, especially the politicians. So sometimes there might be, the experience show that they might have some of the, they want maybe the project to be located in a particular area, but that might be not the consensus of the community. So what is important, there are some of the structures that are inclusive with different members of the communities from the political perspective and even the administrative. It's important also to gain information from those formal kind of, they have some kind of a formal meetings and the likes, and they have some of the deliberations. So if you are talking about, for example, you want to construct a dispensary or a health center. So if that is the product that you want to bring in that community, yes, you have to speak with influential peoples, but you need to be also careful. They might derive you to the wrong place. Yeah, I just wanted to add that one as an important hint. Yeah.
I think so. I think that's a great example, because this happened to us where it was a year of, where we had the general election. So one of the politicians suddenly was very interested. And we could have easily fallen prey to saying, you know what, yes, we finally have political backing. But then we stepped back, we're like, why suddenly? But they had their own motives that were not the same as the community. And should we have done that, that was probably going to seem like it's a successful implementation of the project for 2 weeks. But after the election, the community was going to be like, no, we didn't want this in the first place. So that was a very good point there.
Yeah, that's interesting, and also it reminds me so Kabinga, you started with community center at Zambia, right?
Yes.
How did you? What was the process like when you started engaging with the communities there, and how did you come up? What were some challenges, especially when we're talking about power here? What's something that happened behind the scene, and how did you work towards it?
It was, in hindsight, when you look back, when we're going through it, luckily, the MCW team and just MC-Zambia, there was a lot of work that was being done. And when I look back, it's amazing that we didn't abandon it, but that just talks to, again, the passion, right? Because you need to be able to know where we want to be. And then I remember sometimes, talking to Eddie, and I'll be the one complaining, but he's the one saying, oh, no. This has happened in other communities as well. Trust me. We knew that we'll encounter challenges, right? So you have to factor that in. Don't think it'll be all easy going in. That's one. Two, you have to understand that, one, the dynamics. And when you look at where our community center is located in Zambia, it's about an hour, 20 minutes from the capital city, right? The capital city there are places where you have 5-star hotels. And then this community, just an hour, 30 minutes away, is very, very rural. So that was a challenge in itself, getting things there, even just getting the community. The community was very suspicious because everybody else brings T-shirts, and then just leaves. And then, they go back and tell their donors, yes, we help the community. But we felt like, you know what, let's get away from this, practice of just checking a box. Let's try and engage the community in a real meaningful way. And how did we do that? We were present. And what I mean by that is we established ourselves as we are part of this community. So let's not come up with short-term solutions. Let's look at long-term solutions to what we are having, as a community. And so one of the ways we did this was the entry point. We could have gone to the government, but the government would have probably put us somewhere where there was already development. And it would have looked better, to everybody, because it would have said we've engaged X number of people. But I remember going back to this community where we have, it's Chanyanya. It's a very rural area in Zambia. And I saw 6-year-olds, 5-year-olds reading. I was almost in tears because this is something you could have never thought of. And the center itself today is being looked at as a good addition to the educational system within the community, because the children that are coming from there are doing much better in schools because they can already read as they got into school, which is very, very, rare. And so some of the challenges were just understanding the power dynamics within the community. So what we did in terms of to make sure that the community needs are being met, we created a local board just in the village saying, you know what, this is your project. If it fails, you failed. The whole community has failed. So how do you want it to be set up? So we set up a local board in addition to the MCZ board, meaning we had two boards working together, the local board on the ground in the community where we want, because we wanted ownership. Because sometimes when you leave, everybody forgets, but then when you know you're coming on Thursday, everybody starts preparing for you. But that doesn't help anybody, right? So we were present, we were always present using this community because they felt like this is our project and they wanted ownership. So they wanted it to succeed. Yeah.
Great. I think that's a really great example, and it's a real life example where where how it's to present us with an opportunity to how do we actually engage with communities in real time, right? By really giving the ownership to them. And that's wonderful. Thanks, Kabinga, for sharing that with us. And I also want to remind our audience, because we do have some questions pouring in. If you have any questions, make sure to write them in the chat. If you're watching us live on Facebook, make sure to write them also in the chat. Not chat, but the comment box. Just comment them down, and we'll ask the speakers directly in next 5 minutes. Dr. Kengia, are there any examples where you, for example, you work where there were projects happening and you where there was a clear power dynamic that was involved and the community rejected a solution, or because there are policies that are implemented. Let's say government had its own policy that they want to do XYZ project in the community, and the community when you went there, it didn't work out as the government anticipated. Has there been any situations like that, and how were you guys able to deal with it?
Thank you very much. Maybe I can just cite the example I was talking about for the health facilities. So one of the policy for Tanzania is to ensure that every dispensary and health center, they have every village they have dispensary, and every health center for the ward level. So that is a policy level guidance. So sometimes it happens that you might come with a project that might be constructed to a particular village or ward. But when it comes into utilizations, at the end of the day, it might be not as expected. So it happened that way. So what is important that we engage those communities from the beginning, especially when we start the development of the project. Because the issue of utilization is key at the end of the day. So if you are not so sure about the utilizations, then the resource might be inefficient located at a particular area. So that is very important. And the other thing is to bring ownership from the beginning, because sometimes people tend to brand the projects. They might call this is MCW Health Center. So this is MCW project. So that one is, I think, is something that we need to not allow it to occur. Because the problem is when the project ends, people still brand. This was for MCW, this was for something else. So to bring kind of ownership at the local level from the beginning is important. Even the project ends, then the people could still take over and manage the facility. Just wanted to add those comments.
Yeah. Then I think, sorry, Yeah, you bring up a good point about the branding, but also I just wanted to add in terms of sometimes you can't run away from the branding, but what you do is ensure that there's a partnership, right? There's a partnership with the local teams. Because if there's no partnership, as Dr. Kengia is saying, once that project or say MCW team leaves that area, the project lives with them. But if there's a local partnership in terms of a real established local partnership, then you know that that is sustainable. And that's very important in terms of when you engage communities, you have to be able to say, is this a sustainable project? And even from a measuring perspective, sometimes we tend to be told, oh, so you need to measure your impact. Yes, that's well and good. But sometimes measuring that impact may take more than a year, more than 2 years. But their intended impact will be, so you need to understand what are the short-term and what are the long-term impacts. So even from a branding perspective, are you going to go back? Is MCW ever going to go back in the community? If they are, yes, you want people to remember so that people do not forget, so that there's continuity, but there has to be a local partnership.
Sure, I agree with that.
So there's consensus on the ownership, but there are also consensus that there needs to be local partnership that's involved. And I think that's what I was about to say, that it's really important that the project or community, the work that you're doing for it to be sustainable is to make sure that there is local ownership that's there. Even when you plug out, it still remains. The project still remains, the community is still there. I think one of the let's say second last questions that I have is for Dr. Kengia is because as MC Tanzania or we work on oral health, right? And you've been working with MC Tanzania on that front. I wanted to understand that how do we involve the non-oral health professionals when it comes to oral health hygiene, right? So for example, when we're catering to some work, let's say we're talking about oral health, and we only cater to oral health professionals, how important it is for sustainable community development to happen. We should be involving non-oral health professionals as well. And what role does that play in terms of sustainable community development and engagement?
Thank you very much for that very important questions. When we talk about ORS, for example, now, so there are different actors. First of all, when it comes into resources, if you want to invest on oral health, to have like a diverse type, the different facilities into different areas, you need resources. You also need human resource, you need some equipment and the likes. So it's important to have engagement of different actors, even the non-dental, for the purpose of resource mobilization. That is important. But also, the other thing is when we talk about dental oral health care, it caters across everybody. So the beneficiary at the end of the day is not the only dental professionals. Even non-dental, they do benefit from the oral health or oral care. So it's important also to engage them so that they could be aware on oral health, even engage themselves in preventive measures for dental diseases. But the other thing that I should mention also is we are, from our angle from here in Tanzania, I think also in some of the countries, we have a big deficit when it comes into oral health personnel. So the involvement of non-dental cadre is also crucial. So in Tanzania, for example, we have been implementing some of the projects by engaging clinical officers. Those are kind of diploma holders for clinical medicine individuals to be able to take some roles for dental related at minimal levels. so that if there's a more complicated cases, that they could refer to appropriate clinicians. So it's important really to have on board everybody for that one. And the last to mention is the same, as I mentioned earlier, the utilization of services. You can invest, but at the end of the day, you might not have a very good utilization from the demand sides. So it's important also to engage everybody to that end. Thank you.
So utilization of people, and so that makes a lot of sense in terms of, so for example, if you want to go into and work, like for example, those people who right now watching us and they want to work on certain community issue and they want to cater to it. It's also when, and going back to what Kabinga and Dr. Kengia earlier mentioned about stakeholder mapping, also understand who are the other stakeholders who are involved during this process, and not losing sight of the whole picture, and really ensuring that who all else are connected in this. So thank you for Dr. Kengia for mentioning that part. I also want to remind everybody who else, anyone who has a question, to now is the time to start raising their virtual hands, or just write them down in the chat, or just let us know that you have a question, and we'll unmute you and you can ask them, or you can just directly send it to us and I can ask these questions to the speakers. One of the last questions that we have when we talk about, so Kabinga, you mentioned about serving, right? We are here to serve. And it really makes me think about the term leadership, right? What is really the connection between leadership and community development? Now, when we talk about, for example, development, community engagement, there might be different leadership that might be in place. So, for example, when we talk about in policy implementation, there might be a different set of leadership and the skill set that might be required. When it comes to community development, it's a different set of leadership. MCW really, when we put it, MCW really says like, if leadership is not a position, it's an action, right? So it's really in the act. Let's say in Zambia, what about the local teacher who goes to convince the parents of these small children to let them integrate into the schools, or the oral health professionals like the dental therapy students in Tanzania who go out and work with communities themselves in the outreaches. Are they also, would they, like, what's the connection? Where do they come in when it comes to community development, leadership? So, Kabinga, do you want to start with this?
Yes, sure. That's a very good question. And I'm looking at the time. I'm like, how much time do we have? Because that could easily take an hour. But
I would wonder if we can, that we could briefly say it. Maybe we can have another webinar.
No. Yeah, I'll be very brief. It's just that it excites me. But that's why, for me, the definition of leadership in terms of when you look at communities, right? The definition of leadership that fits for me is anybody who's an agent of change for positive impact, right? So you really, with that definition, you really broaden the spectrum of who can be a leader. What impact are they bringing? Are they bringing positive impact into a scenario, right? That's leadership. So from a community perspective, even as MCW, as we've tried to do and continue to try to harness, is to make sure that every place where we go, we create many leaders. And how do you do that? Is one is you empower people. And you don't, empowering may mean different things depending on where you are. Empowering to make decisions, empowering to, because they've got the economic backing. But what we try to do is empowering of the mind, in terms of you need to change that mindset of people feeling like I don't bring anything to the table, because that's not true. Because you are a leader, immediately you suggest something that can be actualized and improve the well-being of the community. And that's what we try to make sure we push, right? It's like everybody is an agent of change in the community. So you give them hope. And sometimes that's all people need in terms of to say you've got more than you are actually showing. There's more inside you. Dig deep so that you can bring it out, so that you can be a blessing and you can just help your community. And that's why it's good. So how do you do that at the community level? Ask questions. Ask questions, right? And don't ask questions sometimes that are personal. Get to know the people so you know their stories. Why? Because then you know how to empower them. You know how to help them realize their true potential. And we can send all the help you need in a community, but when people don't feel like they've got hope and they don't feel like they can make their own decisions, then you're not winning. That's why, as long as somebody is able to make any impact at all, in terms of, as you mentioned, a teacher, in some settings, when you go to a community center, you ask, who's the leader here? They'll probably look at the person who sits in the office. But probably that's the teacher who's actually teaching, the program, who's doing the literacy. He's a leader. So it's the definition of leadership that we need to be, to be cognizant of. And you just need to make sure that people have a voice. Everybody has a voice. And when somebody has a voice, you're building a leader.
Beautifully put. Thank you, Kabinga, for that. Dr. Kengia.
Thank you very much. Just to add what Kabinga said, I would add like two more points. One is from the basic idea of leadership that we are talking about. You have an individual who is influencing others. So for the community development, we are really must have people who can influence the different peoples to be able to accomplish particular goals, if it's a project or something like that. So what is important then, you need to also have some qualities or some of the understanding of people, because at the end of the day, you are dealing with peoples. Then there's a people's dynamics. People are not the same. You need also to understand how to engage peoples, because the way we are born, we are different from one person to another. How you can utilize individuals with some dominance characteristics, individual who are influencing, individual steadiness, individual consciousness is important while you are doing the community development issues. But the second thing is we need to go beyond the formal leaders. Sometimes we concentrate with the formal leaders while we're engaging the communities, those who are within the approved structures for the government and the likes of political wings. But we also need to understand there are some people who are influential, but kind of informal in the communities. For example, if you go to a community like Maasai, you'll find people like, they call them as Laibons. Those are highly respected leaders with that tribe. So with community development, you need also to go beyond the formal leaders' engagement. You must go and engage also the informal or influential. Thank you very much.
Thank you for adding to it. I think when you guys mentioned about the sense of connectedness, a sense of making sure that there's ownership. There are, of course, the skill set that's required in making sure that you engage and communicate with the community. And also, what I'm able to extract from the conversation is also having a sense of empathy and understanding that we're all different, and there might be different sets of issues, and everybody has a voice, and making sure that you ensure that you try your best to make sure that the other person feels comfortable in voicing what they have to voice out in their opinion. And thank you so much. I think when, as Kabinga mentioned, leadership and community development can be a whole different conversation altogether. Maybe we can do another conversation on it. Actually, our next webinar is focused on leadership. So this is a good segue into that. So thank you both for taking out time. I think we have a few minutes to just cater to any questions that the audience might have. if you, all those who are tuning in on Zoom, if you guys have any questions, feel free to send it in the chat or just raise your virtual hand. And I'm also looking at the chat box here. So there is a question from Inda. Hi, I'm Inda from Indonesia. I want to ask Mr. Kabinga and Mr. James along to today's interesting discussion. What is the best way to measure that we already empower people by community development? What is a way of measuring that we are actually empowering people? That's a great question. Kabinga or Dr. Kenya, do you want to take that? Who wants to take that up?
So in terms of our start, I think one is you need to be able to understand your why, right? You engage the community. Because when you do, then you can be able to have define what success means. But that said, don't discount the small changes that happen within the community as you get to your end point. So I'll give an example. You go in a community that never say, you wanted village banking, let's say village banking. So there's financial literacy, but then you don't have returns yet. You start doing outreach on financial literacy. You don't have outreach and you don't have measurements yet on who is banking with the village banking, but you need to be able to take those small wins of saying, you know what, we help the community understand, one, even just to make a budget. So try to make sure that you don't take away from the small everyday wins, because those small wins put together is what really will define the empowering at the end of the day. Are people more willing, depending on, and I think, it would have been nice to understand exactly what context, but in this case, sometimes even just people coming forward to say, people who were normally just quiet in terms of, they start becoming influential within their communities, then that can be a measurement of success. Doctor, anything to add?
Go ahead, Dr. Kengia.
Thank you very much. So just to add on that one, you need to get some feedback from them. So if you have done something from the community, usually they give feedback. Going and visiting them, you find some of the feedback in terms of the way you have engaged them. So if it was, for example, service type of a project, then you will have some of the feedback related to the utilizations, even the issue of ownership and the sustainability part of the project. So to me, I think the success could be measured through visiting the community and have some of the feedbacks.
So celebrating small wins, asking the question why, and then getting feedback from the community itself. If you unmuted you, sorry, I have to unmute you again. Do you want to, if you have a follow-up question or comment, you are unmuted. You can ask the speakers directly.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'm just unmuted now. It's good. It's really nice insight for us to have, and don't forget about the feedback itself, because we just not give, but we also hear and listening to their maybe milestone when they are joining our community development. That's great. Thank you, Mr. Kabinga and Mr. James.
Thank you.
Thank you, Inda. And
Thanks.
I think we're gonna use we have one last minute. We're gonna wrap this up with the question that Olive has asked. So I wanna request that, so in your last remarks, so Dr. James, and Kabinga, if you could, any last thoughts, any concluding thoughts that you want to share with the audience. And also, I think all of us, as we normally want to impact the lives of those in our communities, which kind of advice do you give us to bring this forward? And I feel that this is quite linked with what might be the ending remarks as well.
So to me, if somebody is interested to work with the communities, we needed to go and start with the community and finish with the community. So sometimes we forgot, we develop the theory of change while we are in a city, and then we want it to be implemented in the communities. It's better to go there, start with the people, develop the theory of change, and then you implement with people and you finish with people and all the success with the people. Thank you. Back to you.
Thanks. So I'll take it from here. And so I think, Olive, very good question, especially as an ending. It's one is you have to understand the commonality of purpose, right? What do you want to, where do you want to go in terms of, so when you have to go to the community to be able to make this happen. And sometimes we get, and I'm speaking because I've lived in two different places in terms of, I've lived in a developing country and in a developed nation per se. But so don't let resources, especially financial resources, hold you back from doing something. Because sometimes you have to just go into the community, engage them, so that maybe there's opportunities for collaboration, and there's small ways you can probably help them move forward in terms of from where they are today to the next step, maybe even just 2 steps forward. And then maybe, you know, when there's a commonality of purpose between what you're trying to do and what the community, you know, you find that is the issue in the community, you can be able then to, you know, galvanize your resources together and be able to actually make your project, bring a project to life. And even maybe even bring in other partners. And because sometimes I think as well, we try to, you know, when you want to help somebody, you have to understand sometimes you might just be a door for that, you know. Like, I'll give an example. If somebody, I'm in Tanzania, right? And somebody says, I want to open a dental clinic. It would be unwise for me to try and do everything so that my name is on the placard. I should be happy enough to be like, oh, who else? So you have to be able to, resource mobilization is also people mobilization. You have to know who's better at this, who can help me get, or sometimes that's all you need for the community in terms of if you want to impact the lives of the community, just connect them to somebody. Like I would be like, oh, Dr. Kengia, you know, there's this question, maybe run with it. And I can even be, maybe I'm the person who's actually taking you know, minutes in the meeting because I'm not an expert in that field, but I'm just connecting people. So sometimes it's just as easy as that. So don't discount the level of impact you can have in any community.
I think that's wonderfully put, and I think that would be the ending last statement. That, you know, not underestimate what you can contribute, but also it takes a lot of courage to say like, hey, this is not maybe my expertise, and somebody else can contribute, and that could be the best for the community itself. As to summarize, we talked about today with engaging with different types of communities, asking the questions of why, doing the stakeholder mapping, and understanding who do we want to engage in the solution making process, about leadership and development, and what are the different types of development that are present. Thank you so much, all those who joined us today, and we went 4 minutes ahead over time, but thank you for sticking by. Thank you, Dr. Kengia, Dr. Kabinga, for joining us today in this discussion. We could probably go an entire day just to talk about this, but we've actually run out over time. Thank you for joining us and for gracing us with your presence, with your insights, and with this meaningful conversation. all those who are joining us on Facebook and Zoom. We'll also be coming up with next webinars. Our next webinar is on leadership, actually, so youth leadership, and we'll be bringing in another set of speakers to talk with us more about and give us insights about leadership as a whole. Thank you all who joined us from different parts of the world. Have a great afternoon, rest of the day, night. Depends on your time zone. Thank you, guys.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much.